Hey, this is Kim. I'm here at Mind Over Matter Meditation Center in Holliston, Mass. And this is our Friday forecast for Friday, March 18th. We are doing a special Sunday spring equinox and solar return edition for this week's forecast. So this weekend had a lot of 1-2 punch stuff going on. Last week we had the daylight savings, which is always fun if you're in an area that does recognize the change of time. So here in the northern hemisphere in the northeast, we sprung ahead an hour, and it can really be disruptive on a few levels. So it definitely can mess with your sense of sleep and just sort of time and where you think you're supposed to be in a given moment and what you're actually doing. I know for us, we see it at home with our animals because they so know when dinner time is. And this seems to be the clock schedule that they really prefer. And honestly, I think it's the one that I prefer as well. So I've heard rumors that we may actually be done with the daylight savings practice, which would be fantastic, but that's just my opinion. So anyway, it does lead to and can be felt as extra tired, especially because here we are, as we've talked about over the last few weeks, at the end of a solar cycle. And not just a solar cycle, but at the end of a significant solar cycle, seeing as how the past 2 years have been disruptive. And so when we disrupt again, after we've been dealing with so much disruption, it can come out in agitation, frustration, especially as we're moving into a full moon that's just highlighting all of those feelings and sort of exasperating everything. So you may have noticed some of that last week. And if you did, it's all, again, just part of how we're little barometers here on Earth, picking up on everything else that's going on around us pretty much all the time. And this is where free will and discernment come into play, and being able to assimilate what's coming in and decide for yourself what's important for you and what's not. We've talked before about value and how nobody else can really determine what your value system is, only you can, and what brings value for you. And likewise, it's not really our place to impose our value systems on other people. It's an individual, a very, very individual feeling. And so a feeling of value, a feeling of winning. So last week was the full moon. So it's about accomplishments, right? And so we've discussed this before. So as we come into the full moon cycle, it's really about looking at what we have accomplished and really reveling in those accomplishments. And it may also highlight what didn't get done. And so it's always sort of a picking and choosing, right? Reprioritizing, recalibrating in any given moment to the situation that's going on. And at the same time, figuring out how to stay true to your path and what you are trying to do. So I know for me, there was a lot of restructuring the days as I was going. You start every day with this list of things that need to be accomplished, but life sort of happens. And when you want to honor the flow of the day, it's nice to sort of have that shell and that structure of, okay, this is what I'm going to get done. But knowing that as long as at the end of the day, these things are accomplished, I can work with the energy of the day to be happier, to be more present, to be less in my head about my to-do list, and actually having the experiences and the feelings that are going along with everything that I'm doing at any given moment. And then we can hit those little accomplishments. So I know for me, when I am able to tick off something on a to-do list, that feels like a win. And it builds momentum. So when you can look at it that way, that you get this feeling of accomplishment and allow that feeling to translate into a feeling of winning, there's this sort of like inner celebration and this feeling of joy that comes from that, because it feels like a win. And who doesn't love that feeling? And so we've been so conditioned to look at winning in a sense of competition with something outside of ourselves, whether it's academically, whether it's athletically, whether it's even in modern science. We see a lot of competition for people winning the trust of people, or people who are in contracting businesses win contracts, win bids. And so we see the word winning a lot. And I think that our value system around winning has always sort of been in this place of external. And I think that that's where we get a little bit misled, because life really is a game, and it has these universal rules for each individual person. We have collective rules for humanity on just how to all share this planet and share these resources together and respect one another. And then we have our individual sort of set of rules, our own individual game of life that we're really only playing with us and our divine creator. And so it's not scorekeeping to the way that we sort of think about scorekeeping as far as, a reason to reward or punish. Although a lot of times winning can be associated with reward and punishment. And so that, again, I think is where we can get a little bit stuck. So when we're coming into this full moon and we're talking about what we've done, or we're looking at our accomplishments, or again, what we haven't accomplished, that can go to that winning, losing. And we're sometimes easier to see where we've lost or haven't fulfilled what we wanted to do. And that can create a negative momentum of emotion that can move us further away from our goals. And so it's more about looking for the win in the sense of the feeling of winning. So what do you feel like when you have one of those little personal wins? What kind of feeling comes up for you? Is it lightness because you've accomplished something? Is it just an overall joy because it isn't necessarily about the thing that happened? It's the journey of getting there. Maybe you were able to make connections with people, or maybe you had a great conversation, or maybe you had an amazing aha moment. To me, all of those things are wins. And so as I allow myself to go through days where those things are compiling and moving the momentum, it builds up this feeling of joy and excitement over stepping into the next thing. And it makes it a little bit easier to look at the things that haven't been accomplished yet as wins I haven't yet had, but are coming soon. And so that's sort of where we're at when we're moving into the fourth quarter moon out of the full moon. It isn't about what have I accomplished by the full moon and, oh crap, I didn't get everything done that I wanted to. Now what? It's about forgiving yourself, being compassionate with yourself on those things that maybe didn't get done. And now it's about finishing up. So as we move from the full moon to the new moon, it's that winding down and finishing up. So we're in the finish up period, which is an interesting energy to move into this really exuberant sun energy that's coming in today, wanting us to really move into spring and the equinox and the strength of the sun and the return of the divine masculine and the beginning of the solar cycle in Aries. There's a lot of this real push forward. And so maybe at this point, if you've watched enough of these videos, you realize that there's multiple streams of energy happening at the same time. And that's really the beautiful flow and dance of life that we're encouraged to lean into and to sort of just ride that wave, right? So just ride that wave. If you are feeling excited about the building the sun energy, think of it as finishing up the business that you need to do to be ready for what's coming as you move into that space of new and as we come into that rebirth. So we've talked about rebirth in the last few videos, especially the last one. We are so much in a place of rebirth right now. This is so exciting. Spring is all about rebirth. We're watching the little green buds starting to pop up from the ground. We'll start to see the buds appearing on trees. We'll start to see fat little pregnant baby or fat pregnant birds, ready to lay their eggs so that we have those babies coming in a few months in the nest. The spring peepers, the frogs that you can hear at night. I absolutely love that sound. That completely reminds me of childhood. So all of those great things that are coming in right now as signs of newness. And so allowing that feeling of again, going back to whatever brings you joy about the rebirth process, because the rebirth can be messy and complicated and emotional, but it can be exciting and it can be beautiful as well. So really just giving yourself permission to have all the feels right now, just kind of going through all of it, allowing yourself to have all of that. So within that, there's a collective vulnerability that we also are, I think, still working with. And it's that vulnerability of when you've been removed from something for a period of time and you are coming back into it. Or again, just the process of rebirth, that process of shedding your skin, that process of coming out can be a little raw. And so, again, being compassionate with yourself, being compassionate with others, it's really important that we give space for everybody to go through this process if we want to be able to move forward collectively. And right now, that vulnerability in some ways is being used against us, because when vulnerability can be seen as weakness, and when there's an apparent weakness, predatory energy can come into that. And so being very aware of where your vulnerability may be a source of you become the prey for the predator. And that's a tricky one to work with, because nobody, I think a lot of times we withhold those processes in ourselves and don't complete them, or don't even step into them or approach the subject of vulnerability out of fear that we will be preyed upon by that predatory energy. And so it goes back to that confidence in self, know thyself, coming into your center, calibrating to you what's important to you, and trusting that you have the strength and the wherewithal to be able to step into that newness. So I pulled a card out of the moon deck that I absolutely love, the Moonology deck by Yasmin Boland. And funny enough, and I did shuffle them, once again, I got the same card that I pulled last week, which is the full moon in Pisces. So even though we had the full moon in Virgo, full moon in Pisces is what came up. Again, it's beautiful, the two fish. I love this card. It's so pretty. And it's the balance of spirituality and practicality. And I believe that the card came up again because it's still relevant. It's that balance of being connected to the non-physical spiritual part of us that really is trying to guide us in the direction of our best life path, and the practicality of what that looks like in day-to-day action. And so again, that feeling of vulnerability, sometimes when we don't know how to move forward practically, we look to others to direct us. And so if that energy is a loving and compassionate energy, it's going to help direct us in a way that keeps us really on track with our true nature. If that energy that we're looking towards, or that place that we're looking for guidance, is more of a predatory nature, it's gonna look a little different, and it's gonna feel a little different, because it's gonna say, oh, that's okay, let me make that decision for you, let me guide you, mwahaha, sort of that evil professor, or whatever, that sort of thinking of when you're feeling vulnerable and other people can see your vulnerability, and what then they have a choice to do with it. And so when you notice that you're handing your power away to situations, that can invoke that predatory prey energy in that relationship, whether it's work or whether it's interpersonal or whatever it is. And it can be really minute. I'm not talking about overt behavior. It can be. Often it's not. Often it's very subtle. And so it appears to be soothing, which is something we talked about last week, was what can you do to self-soothe? And when we don't know how to self-soothe and we look to others to soothe us, that's when those subtleties can come in that maybe lead us a little bit more astray, instead of offering the comfort that we're actually looking for. And so it's just being mindful about those interactions and making sure that you are really centered and present with yourself, so that you can recognize when something is or isn't in your best interest. So just a little bit about that collective vulnerability. So, just to recap a little bit, looking at winning as a feeling and seeing where you can get more wins in your life. I was thinking about this a lot this past week. We're so obsessed in some way with sports and athletics on this big major level. And I think a lot of what that has to do with is that people have forgotten that their own life is a beautiful interactive game. It's fun and it's exciting and it's unpredictable sometimes, and you get those little wins along the way to show you that it's about bringing up this feeling of your capabilities, what you're capable of, our capacity, our caliber, really recognizing, raising our own caliber. So when we're trying to calibrate to ourselves and we're accomplishing these things where we're getting these little wins, it actually sort of raises the bar for where you even bring yourself forth out into the world from. It's really a very cool process when you start to feel it and start to recognize it and start to see how it shows up in other ways in the world. So anyway, the rebirth, this was so cool. I have never, to the best of my knowledge, seen an actual muskrat in real life, in the wild. Maybe I have, but they're a funny little creature, and look a little bit like a beaver, move a little bit like a raccoon. So on St. Patrick's Day, on Thursday of this past week, on the 17th, I was coming out of the grocery store, and it was evening, so it was dark, and the parking lot lights were on, and I caught something out of the corner of my eye moving. And so a car was coming and the headlights were on it, and I noticed it was a little animal. And this gentleman, God bless his soul, was sort of ushering this little animal with the headlights on, and he was driving through the parking lot to make sure other people saw it and it sort of was able to get on its way without harm. And I was trying to figure out what it was. And he came out of his car, and I said, thank you for being the guiding light, literally, for our little friend. And he said, yeah, it was a muskrat. And I thought, oh my goodness, isn't that incredible that as I'm walking out of the store, this muskrat was literally right there. And so anybody who knows me, whenever I have an interaction with nature, especially animals, I pretty much look up what the meaning is, because I believe that all of our interactions, whether they're interhuman or interspecies, are for us in a gift, and there's a message in some way. Sages come in all shapes, sizes, and forms. And so what was fascinating was when I looked up the lore around muskrat, it was talking about the Native American lore that associates muskrat. So its hind feet are webbed, and it's got a leathery tail, sort of like a beaver, but it's much smaller. And so it has this earth and water element, this crossover between the two. And so it's all about the birthing story of the earth, and how muskrat went down into the depths of the water to dig up the roots and bring them forth to create earth, to birth earth. And so I just share that story because there are so many signs that we're gonna be okay. You just have to look for them and trust. When you have a moment that brings up that warmth, when we have those things that come in, we take in information a lot of times through our gut, through our belly. There's that vagal nerve connection between the head and the brain. So you either take it in as a thought and it dumps down to the nerves in your stomach, or vice versa. You take it in through your gut and it sends that thought loop back up to your brain. But either way, it brings up this rising energy into the heart. You can feel that feeling come in that wants to expand emotionally. And if we can just allow that feeling to come in and to trust that there's a message with that and listen to it, or allow the inspiration that comes along with that to guide your decisions of what to do next with that. Just trust it's going to lead you down some really fun, interesting places that your sort of rote, monotonous way of looking at your life would not have potentially taken you otherwise. And so as we come into spring and as we're coming into this personal rebirth, we're coming into this global rebirth, we're coming into this collective rebirth, this community rebirth, it's really all about that process of coming up and out. Just remember these spaces in your body, up in your heart center, in your gut, down here in your solar plexus. Try to connect more to what you're feeling, what might be going on in those two centers, what you feel inspired to do that may not be your norm. Just trust that process. So I really hope that everybody just enjoys their first week of kicking off this truly new year, truly new cycle. There's lots of things going on, and just bring it back to what's most important for you, for your life, what's going to benefit you, and filter out that which isn't, and just allow it to fall away. In order to rebirth, there's that symbolic death. And so we are allowing that process to finish. We're allowing this new process to begin. And I'm excited to see what that inspires in each of you as we move into spring 2022. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you all are having a lovely weekend. I look forward to next Friday, on the 25th, as we come into the fourth quarter moon and that winding down period. So again, just take this week to finish up anything that the full moon highlighted needed to get done to be ready for something and you weren't ready. So those little things, you can finish those up into this coming week. And then as we retract on the fourth quarter to think about the new seeds and intentions to plant with the next new moon, you'll feel ready to be ready to be ready. This is a concept that I'm really starting to understand more and more and more, that when we really hit our stride and when we are getting those little wins and when we're building that momentum, it's really allowing us to be ready when that next beautiful unexpected thing walks into your life, and you can say yes to it instead of freaking out because you're not ready. So let's get ready. Let's get ready together. Let's help usher in the new. Let's love each other, be compassionate, be understanding, gentle, and I love you all. Mwah. I will see you next Friday on the 25th. Have a wonderful week and happy spring.